Okay. Apologies to people at the back if you can't hear. So I was just starting out by explaining that we've heard Don's exciting vision for the blockchain, which I think all of us on this stage would share in. The value of the Bitcoin being so high, and then that's come down. We're now in this phase of focusing on the blockchain technology itself and what that might do. We have a panel here. Simon, over on the far end, is an investor in a number of companies that are trying.
Okay. Excellent.
Do you ever feel like you've been taken over by somebody else? It's,
but now you have excellent sound. Excellent sound. Just not us.
Maybe they can hear us in the hall next door.
Yeah, maybe. Yeah.
If I move my lips, maybe people think that's what I'm saying.
Let's see.
Are we back?
At least we're having fun.
Can't solve this problem.
Yeah.
Don't you just like hit the on-off switch and it all starts again? Reboot.
I wonder what they've changed since the power came back. Yeah. Normally this is not super complicated.
Want to try again?
Are we on again?
We use our...
No, we're off again.
To try the
test.
again.
No, they're on again. They got some... I think we got the upstairs.
Yeah. That's the sound from the other room.
Here we are.
Hi. Does this work?
Oh.
Okay. So we've changed mics, and as I was saying, for those of you that missed that, I was talking about a completely different subject upstairs for a few moments, but now we're back down here. Simon is an investor in blockchain. Gideon runs a company that's doing private blockchains, and Olaf is working to deal with PricewaterhouseCoopers' worry that the blockchain may do audit firms out of business, but also that many of his clients are coming in and wondering what blockchain might mean for them. I was just reading out loud from a blog by someone called Mike Hearn, who's a blockchain programmer, who basically has written this very controversial post saying that the blockchain Bitcoin experiment is dead and failed. And he says this: if you'd never heard about Bitcoin before, would you care about a payments network that couldn't move your existing money, had wildly unpredictable fees that were high and rising fast, allowed buyers to take back payments they'd made after walking out of shops by simply pressing a button, is suffering large backlogs and flaky payments, which is controlled by China, and in which the companies and people building it were in open civil war? And I guess the answer to that is probably you wouldn't be terribly excited about that network. So I wanted to ask, first of all, Simon to respond. You know, is the whole Bitcoin blockchain thing falling apart, as Mike Hearn suggests? And I guess that means that the Don's vision would be misplaced at this point.
So firstly, I made a Bitcoin transaction this morning. It worked just fine. For sure, the network is still in its sort of early stages of being built out. So typically, when you want to make a transaction, you wait for up to 10 minutes for a block to be confirming the transaction. There have been a few kind of peak periods in the last months where you might have to wait longer than that. But there are a whole group of engineers that are working to firstly improve the throughput in the network, and that's part of what caused that blog that you mentioned such furor. Is there's a debate around how to improve the network's capacity and throughput. And then secondly, there's also the same group of engineers are working to decrease the confirmation time from something like 10 minutes I mentioned, down to 10 seconds, and something that will be much more consumer friendly.
This mic is back on now. Is that right? At the back? Great. Okay. Underlying the vision of blockchain is this notion that we have decentralized trust, essentially, that it's a vast network of people that allow us to trust this system. And yet what's going on here, it seems to me, and is highlighted by this post, is we're discovering that the blockchain is really a technology that needs to be able to evolve if it's going to achieve the kind of speed and power that the visionaries want it to achieve. And yet that decision seems to be controlled by a very small group of geeks who don't seem to like each other very much.
Well, it's an open source project, and like all great open source projects, there are a lot of voices disagreeing with each other about how it should progress. So specifically, some of the limitations of the network today are that it can take up to 10 minutes to confirm a transaction. The peak throughput is 7 transactions per second, which if you compare to, say, Visa's network, which is the order of magnitude of tens of thousands of transactions per second, it's 10 to the 5 slower. And those things need to be fixed, and some very talented computer programmers are disagreeing about how best to fix that. And part of the reason I think Mike lost patience with that is that last summer he made a proposal about how to fix that, and it turned out that his proposal was technically flawed, and he lost that debate and he sort of walked off in a huff, unfortunately. But that's not to say that the process of improving the network is failing, it's just that it's baby steps. And unfortunately, the inventor of Bitcoin, Satoshi, that Don mentioned earlier, did not leave a very kind of clear constitutional blueprint as to how these decisions should be taken. And as a result, there's a meritocracy of something like sort of 10 to 20 world-class computer programmers that are debating with each other very openly in forums as to how best to improve some of these shortcomings.
But if you contrast that with the internet, there was a clear system of governance, and that allowed it to evolve the core software quite quickly.
There was a committee, the IETF and other committees that existed at the ICANN at the very beginning of the internet, and there were, by all accounts, kind of fist fights and very strong debates then around how the internet should be designed too. So the analogy is in fact a fair one. And my hope is that the blockchain will emerge from this stronger, but it's by no means certain that that's the case. And it may be that these guys can't agree, and it does stagnate or take a while for it to fulfill its full potential.
So one last question on this. I mean, how does it play out from here in your ideal scenario? How do we get through this forking debate that's going on at the moment?
Well, as we speak, there are, really 2 camps that are in open discussion as to whether they, in computer parlance, they should hard fork the code in order to upgrade it, or if it can be done in a more gradualized way. And I think that the good news is that both camps want the same end goal, so they're aligned with where they're heading towards, but the disagreement is on the steps along the way, which in the grand scheme of things, I'm sort of hopeful that they'll be able to reach an accommodation with each other.
Now, Gideon, I mean, one of the things that, Don talked a bit about this was, we're talking about this blockchain that is associated with Bitcoin, and seems to be that even though you say the money is not the significant part of that, it's the underlying technology that you still have to deal with Bitcoin to use that particular dominant blockchain. But you're now, we've had this thing, there's Ethereum out there, which also seems to be having a few difficulties. But then there's also things that like you're working on, which are private blockchains. Tell us a bit about that and what's going on there and where you see that fitting into the broader blockchain revolution story.
So from the perspective of a large company today, the Bitcoin blockchain is too new and too much like the Wild West for them to depend on it. And that's what we learned from a lot of conversations we had. But the underlying technology behind it, which is a way to create a synchronized database that's shared across the internet between non-trusting entities, that underlying mechanism can be packaged in a slightly different way to make it suitable for many large companies. And that's essentially what a private blockchain is. Some people in the Bitcoin blockchain camp take objection to the idea or to the use of the same term, but it's essentially a way to do something similar to what the Bitcoin blockchain does, but between known entities rather than between everyone on the internet who wants.
Now, with the Bitcoin blockchain, Bitcoin is there with this mining system to provide incentives to people to invest in maintaining that whole ledger system. How does it work with a private blockchain?
So in a private blockchain, generally, you can do away with that system, which is called proof of work, which is essentially that you need the people who validate the transactions or to create the blocks to do something difficult, spend a lot of electricity and a lot of money in order to have the right to create a block on the chain. Once you have a network which is more closed and has a known list of permitted block validators, you can have much simpler schemes for preventing any small number of them from taking over the chain. So you can do away with proof of work and you can do away with the cryptocurrency, and instead you just have a kind of shared ledger which is collectively managed by those known entities.
But what you're doing here is effectively trying to create a walled garden system, and presumably it will be used by the banks as the primary.
Yeah, so one of the first obvious applications of this is in the finance sector, because the finance sector looked at Bitcoin both as a potential threat and also as an inspiration of how these systems could be built better. So those are the first use cases that came out, though I think they may have some problems in terms of the radical transparency that these systems have. But the applications of it are much broader than that. It's essentially a way for multiple companies or entities to coordinate with each other via a database.
But does that, if we go down this private route, are you immediately going away from this utopian, decentralized vision of the new internet that the Bitcoin blockchain represents?
Yeah, my view is that these are two completely separate projects which have a shared technology base, but their use cases will be different. I think as the years go on, we'll start to see the boundaries between them blurring, because you can have semi-private, semi-public chains. But yeah, I do think that the idea of a private blockchain has nothing to do with this utopian vision of censorship-free transactions.
So Olaf, I mean, 2 years ago you were moderating the panel on the Bitcoin. Now you're very much talking the blockchain story. Tell us a bit about, I mean, how do you at PwC see this blockchain revolution affecting your clients? Are you getting a lot of interest from clients? And how might it affect the future of your company?
Yeah, we look at it from two angles. So first of all, of course, from a strategy consulting perspective, we have many clients wondering where does Bitcoin stand in early 2016, and also what does it mean for them. But we clearly look at the blockchain technology from a broader picture perspective, because look, many clients see applications that fall much more into your territory than into the broader Bitcoin discussion. And we also look at it from our what does it mean for PwC perspective. Look, we are a trusted brand associated with digital trust, a trusted institution, and of course it affects us. We make money today from providing certain trusted services that might not be needed in a blockchain world, at least in some specific applications or countries. So that's something we need to deal with. But we also see an opportunity to contribute to technology-enabled ecosystems like the hybrid or closed blockchains you were describing. They need trusted institutions, and then you can really kind of not need proof of work in similar scenarios anymore, because you have participants that provide the trust that's needed to make the blockchain work. So these scenarios all play a role in our discussions, but I would say at the moment, the most urgent discussion is clearly the one, what can clients do with it? And this has really evolved. 2 years ago, Bitcoin was approaching 1,000 per Bitcoin. There was the big hype. We were upstairs discussing where is that going next. And then 6 weeks later, it tanked. And now we are kind of much more, the technology behind works, obviously. Bitcoin is one application that has proven that it can work on a bigger scale. But where's the next, as we call this panel, also for blockchain?
And so where do you think the next applications are going to be? If it's not as a currency, is it going to be wiping out settlement fees for the banking industry? Is it?
So the most activity is clearly on the settlement front. That's true. We already see joint ventures forming where we contribute with expertise. But wherever you have relatively high transaction cost, there is somebody who tries to disrupt that. So that's for sure. And if there are enough people who are in a position to provide, let's say, sufficiently stable technology that's available on a commercial basis, there will be somebody trying to disrupt these value chains, yes.
Now, Gideon, you know, if you're making a private blockchain for the banks, I think there's a lot of people that suspect that's a way that the banks will try and form an oligopoly to stop the kind of destruction of their profit base that maybe the blockchain, the broader blockchain, could bring about. Is that something that you think is going on?
Well, I think they are responding to the threat that Bitcoin represents, but I think it's mainly actually an orthogonal process. I think that it's simply a way for banks to make their back office processes more efficient. And that's something which if we're optimistic, will eventually trickle down into lower fees for the end customers of the banks, because banks do spend a lot of money on IT. But I don't think they necessarily think this is going to let them prevent Bitcoin developing, because the people that are really attracted to Bitcoin and what it can do aren't served by this kind of private blockchain.
And do you still think that the main Bitcoin blockchain is going to provide those sorts of creative, destructive threats to vast amounts of the financial services?
I think the Bitcoin blockchain will continue to grow and will have some very compelling applications. I don't personally see its most promising application as the basis for a consumer currency. I don't think that's something that consumers are particularly attracted to, and I think we see that in the empirical numbers of how many people are actually...
No, but I think a lot of what banks traditionally have done is intermediate, take large fees for doing so, like whether it be settlements or payments is an obvious area where people expect the blockchain to wipe out billions and billions of banking charges. Do you expect that to happen?
It may happen in the long term, but I don't see any signs for now that it's eating away at those kind of things that banks do. I think that Bitcoin has much more niche uses than sending money around the world for regular transactions.
What do you think, Simon?
Well, I think that this is a very timely and important question. There are, depending on how you measure it, I think around 200 people only that have contributed to the core Bitcoin protocol code base, if you look on GitHub. And really, when you strip it down, about 90% of the code that's been added in the last 1 to 2 years has been written by this meritocratic group of core committers, which is only 10 to 20 strong. These are the folks that are voting on the forking question that we were talking about earlier. What is much more interesting is above that, there are literally tens of thousands of developers building applications for the blockchain today. And none of those yet have reached kind of mass market adoption. And when we go back and look at the birth of the internet, the sort of first killer applications were viral. It was things like email and then later search, etc. The equivalent of that for the blockchain world has not yet been launched, or if it has been launched, it hasn't yet received escape velocity. And some people would argue that Bitcoin itself as a currency and a way to send money as a bearer of value is a killer application. To Gideon's point, it is growing.
Especially if you're a terrorist.
Yeah, it is growing exponentially. It's growing, but it's only growing at 2x per year, which is still an exponential growth, but it's not 10x per year compounding. And the use cases today historically have been, unfortunately, drugs and some illegal activities, but at the same time, that forensically is a more transparent network for the government to hunt down criminals than laundered cash. They were able to track down and arrest the Silk Road founder on the network, which is, they found that easier than getting El Chapo, right? So I do believe that in the longer term, Satoshi's original vision of hollowing out the major transaction networks could come into reality. I think it's unlikely that the first country it will do that will be the US or Germany, but I could imagine that in a failed country, in Venezuela or Greece or somewhere that otherwise has kind of fallen off the map, that Bitcoin could be quite interesting.
So just to push you on this, the currency is something where, as a Bitcoin, even if we really see the blockchain evolve as this sort of second internet, as it were, we're still going to have the Bitcoin integrally part of that, and presumably worth quite a lot more than it is today if that happens. Yeah,
I don't follow the price that carefully. I mean, I own some Bitcoin, but it's not an important part of my personal portfolio. And whether today it's $380 or $1,000, I think is not the most important question. The most important question is how many developers are working to build applications on top of the platform? Are those developers some of the most talented people that we as venture capitalists know? Someone like Gideon is a very talented programmer, and was working on some other things a few years ago and downed his tools and decided this was actually going to be what he was going to be spending his time on. And so that, to me, is the most important question in terms of the kinds of opportunities that we see to invest in.
One comment here. You talked about mass adoption of Bitcoin and why we see it or why we are not seeing it. And I would say mass adoption always happens if a consumer compares Bitcoin to the alternatives. We should not forget that transaction fees go down every year, and alternative apps and other means to transact also in emerging countries go live every year. So we have more and more alternatives. They are easier and easier to use, and Bitcoin is just one of these alternatives. And obviously, the Bitcoin alternative was not so much better than all the others that mass adoption has happened yet. So the technology is clearly there and stable and works, but we at least cannot yet see, also not in the foreseeable future, that there is some hockey stick of Bitcoin adoption.
Yeah, I mean, there are about 10 million Bitcoin wallets in existence, which is more users than the internet web had in 95, 96. I mean, so it's not 93, it's sort of 95, but it's just not growing as fast, partly because the applications don't exist yet. And so from a venture capitalist perspective, that's the area that many investors are looking very carefully at. What could these applications be? And
is there anything emerging that, as venture capitalists, there seems to be people betting more on as a first killer app?
Yeah, there's a few different ideas. There's a lot being done around smart contracts, which could include kind of corporate uses. There's a hope. A smart contract is a contract where programmatically the payout happens in such a way that you don't need kind of lawyers and calling up a bank and wiring money. So, for example, when Olaf was talking about PwC's core business being under threat, one can imagine a world where when I pay my taxes, I don't call up my accountant at PwC and say, how much do I owe this year? Please figure it out. And then I wire money to the UK government, but it just automatically, programmatically comes out of my salary, and PwC's fees as my accountant disappears. So that's an example of a smart contract that would obliterate 40% of his business.
Are you worried about that, Olaf?
Not really. So what I clearly see is, aside from Bitcoin, on the blockchain side, I see many applications where actually a trusted institution would add a lot of value to the proposition. So the technology that you're providing, Gideon, is good, but it's not good enough. It's always a combination of technology, of governance, and what we should also not forget, regulation does not go away. So whenever you take the blockchain technology and put it into any commercial context, the commercial context is still framed by what is allowed in that commercial context, what laws exist in that country or in that group of countries. And of course, you need to find a way to deal with it. And as long as these scenarios do not go away, we see many applications where we can also provide services that go beyond of what we provide today and really take maybe also traditional services that you were describing and take them into the smart contract age. Why not? And also have something that we can contribute where everybody would benefit.
And to be clear, I'm not suggesting that this is going to happen in the next year or two, but maybe by the time that you're going to retire as a partner.
Looking forward to that.
So, Gideon, I mean, from your point of view, trying to create this private blockchain, what are the biggest challenges that you're facing, and how quickly are you likely to sort of reach critical mass with what you're doing? So
the most prominent potential application of this technology is in the finance sector. And there's two main problems trying to apply it in that sector. First of all, it's a very, very traditional, slow-moving sector for very good reasons. Banks tend not to be the first adopters of new technologies because we don't want them to lose our money. And the second problem is that by their nature, blockchains provide a huge amount of transparency to all of their participants about everything that's going on. So if you have 10 banks that come together to create a private blockchain, unless you apply some very advanced cryptography, which is not yet mature, every bank sees what every other bank is doing. And that kind of radical transparency is generally not comfortable for financial institutions, which, although they have some shared interests in terms of lowering costs, they are ultimately fiercely competitive in many of the marketplaces in which they operate.
And so how long do you think before you can overcome those challenges?
Well, I would estimate the first live deployment of assets on a blockchain in something like 2 or 3 years' time. But it's going to be in an area where confidentiality is not critical. So for example, trade finance tends not to be like a high-frequency competitive environment, so there it might be applied quickly.
So we're sort of nearing the end of our time. I mean, I wonder, Simon, if you would start by just sketching out where you would like to see the kind of people that are venture capitalists or software programmers focusing their attention over the next couple of years.
So firstly, I'm long this space. I think that there are bumps in the road relating to the way that the Constitution works, how mature the code is, but I can believe that in the same way as information was digitized and became programmatic 25 years ago, and the New York Times and other media companies, their business model was under pressure, that money is now programmatic. And if you fast forward 10 or 20 years, the world of money will have changed enormously. Whether it is the existing Bitcoin blockchain that heralds that, or something that's based on a similar technology, but perhaps an evolution of it, that I cannot promise. Nor can I, unfortunately, with a crystal ball, time the market and say it's going to happen this year, next year, 3 years. I'm reasonably confident that it's not going to be this year. So the bets that we've made as Mosaic have been early, but in very well-funded companies that have the necessary runway to hopefully make a contribution over several years to this space. But I'm optimistic without being able to A, call the timing, or B, the killer application that's going to set it alight.
Gideon, I mean, similar for you. I mean, would you actually, if you weren't already in the space now, be getting into this space? And where would you advise your fellow
I wouldn't be getting into it now because
yeah.
because so much noise has been made about it and so much hype has been made about it. There's so many companies now active in the space. For example, we have probably 20 or 30 competitors, though very few of them have actually released a product. So no, I wouldn't think now is the best time to get into the space from scratch, but I think if you got into it a couple of years ago, you might do well, and if you wait 3 or 4 years for the smoke to clear and for the real financial opportunity to present itself, that might also be a good time. Very much like the dot-com boom and bust and all these companies that had great business models but were just 10 years before their time.
And Olaf, what about you? I mean, which of your clients are you, without naming names, which sectors are you basically saying you really need to scale up your activities on the blockchain here?
So I agree with both of you. It's a bit early. 2016 is clearly a year of experimentation and internal piloting. But 2017, we'll see some small-scale applications of the blockchain technology. We believe in blockchain as a technology, and we are actually confident that there will be some applications beyond, let's say, niche scenarios where blockchain will have a dramatic impact. Not so bullish on Bitcoin. It's a great application. It really kind of sparked the whole discussion. But let's see where this takes us. But on the application side, I think we'll say way more than just, let's say, banks and governments looking into this, because the creativity you can kind of like leverage here is kind of endless. And blockchain is such a fundamental technology that I can see many, many more industries betting on it. And we are already talking to industries that you wouldn't kind of believe. Real estate, for example.
Okay, well, so just to finish, and just because I don't want to let you wriggle off without any firm prediction, so the current price of a Bitcoin is?
380.
380. Mm-hmm. When we're here again next year discussing why 2017 is going to be the breakthrough year for blockchain, what will the price of Bitcoin be? Simon?
I don't care.
Oh, come on. Give it up or down?
I think it will go up, but perhaps between 10 and 30%. But I don't care, honestly.
800.
800 back there. What about you, Gideon?
600.
600.
400.
Okay, and I'm going to say 200 just to be a bearish person on this whole list. So thank you very much to the panel. I think you've got a sort of nice balance between Don's vision and the more practical reality. So thank you very much.